guys, it's Sam, and today I'm going to talk about the books that are on the top of my witchy TBR, to be read pile. So recently I did a video on my witchy goals for the year, so I'll link that on the screen if you haven't seen that yet. In that video I talk about some of the topics that I want to research more, some of the things that I want to do, and a lot of these books sort of tie into that. So I have 10, let's get into it. First is the book I'm currently reading, and that is Wild Magic, Celtic Folk Traditions for the Solitary Practitioner by Danu Forrest. I'm about halfway through this and really enjoying it. This is talking about a mix of, again, Celtic traditions, so it's combining some like British, Welsh, Scottish, Irish, and she does a really good job of talking about like the myths that these come from and like where some of the history is. The one complaint I have with this book so far is she puts a lot of the Gaelic terms in there and words, but like no pronunciation after it. I'm like, not everyone just like knows Gaelic. Like I know some of the words, pronunciations and stuff, but I wish that was in there a little bit more. And this is definitely a nice starter because there's some things that I think I will go into and research a little bit more after this, but a nice starting point. And it kind of divides things into like the different elements because so much of this is animism, is a lot of like Celtic tradition and things. So there's a lot of like focus on those different things, different rituals that you can do, things like that. So this is a nice starting point and I really enjoyed this. This is one of the many books that are on this list that are focusing on predominantly Irish, but like Celtic in general, because there's a lot of crossover magic and traditions and folk magic and things. So I am currently really prioritizing Celtic witchcraft and paganism. Next is Irish Witchcraft from an Irish Witch by Laura O'Brien, who is a very well-known Irish witch in the community, does a lot of like workshops and podcasts and classes and things. This book is a mix of looking at Irish witchcraft from a academic standpoint, kind of what people used to do and kind of current state of Irish witchcraft, and then it for the future, reclaiming some of those traditions, things like that. If I like that book, I will probably read more from her because she does have a number of different books, and so does Danu Forrest actually, on different Irish traditions and folk stories and things like that. Next is Irish Paganism, Reconstructing Irish Polytheism by Morgan Daimler. This is my like stepping into, the other two books have a little bit about like different gods and stuff too, but this is much more of a focus on deities. So again, because I feel like potentially I could be moving towards working with different Irish deities, I want to know more about them. I feel like we hear about some of the big ones, like you hear about the Morrigan a lot. I actually really like the Morrigan, so who knows? But you hear about the Morrigan a lot, you hear about Bridget here and there, who's like a Celtic deity, but I feel like there's so many more that I could be really drawn to, and I'm just very curious about, again, all of those stories, all of the lore, all of how Irish people used to worship them and do in current day and things like that. We have the Book of Hedge Druidry, again, another book that's about solitary practitioners, so this is a complete guide for the solitary seeker. I don't necessarily consider myself like a druid or anything, but again, this is kind of the last of this theme of books on this list of exploring Celtic traditions at this more animism root, because that is very much what Celtic traditions were about. Different rituals, different rites, tree magic, things like that. So this is, I think, maybe one of the ways to kind of tie all of these things together that I will learn about in the other books. We'll see. Then adjacent to these, not necessarily completely, is this actually published even by a witchy? No, I think this is like kind of potentially witchy adjacent, I'm not really sure. But it's Botanical Folktales of Britain and Ireland. Again, so much of reconstructing folk traditions and things is looking at folk tales of those things. So this is exploring the relationship between peoples in the sort of like British and Irish culture and their relationship to different natural elements. So again, gonna flesh out a lot of some of that other stuff that I've been talking about. Then taking a bit of a turn, but something that I think I need to do because it's very applicable. Urban Magic, A Guide for the City Witch. This is one that I need to read just because I am not super based in nature. I want to get out in it more and travel and things like that, but I live in Chicago. I live in a very big city. So I think finding ways to apply some of this stuff in reconstructing sort of like Celtic traditions and things and being like, all right, yes, and also, how do I practice more efficiently as a city witch? How can we use a lot of the books will say, you know, find a place in nature and blah, blah, blah. How do we adapt that to a city and urban landscape? I think this will be helpful for that. And we have a book I recently picked up because I've been seeing it everywhere. That's Botanical Curses and Poisons, The Shadow Life of Plants. This, number one, is just like stunning and foiled and gorgeous. And this isn't necessarily completely a witchy, but it's a mix of like, again, tales of some of these plants and things over the years, poisons, and how this ties into history, and that's my vacuum starting. This is essentially talking about the history of toxic plants. So a mix of like learning about some stuff for like baneful magic purposes, but also just like witchy, delightful things and like, yeah, just stories about plants, which I love. Then we have Sacred Sex by Gabriela Herstik. Gabriela Herstik was one of the first authors that I read, and her book, Inner Witch, was kind of basic, but was still like, I think fondly of in the way that it introduced me to a lot of things witchy-wise when I was feeling a little bit freaked out by some things. But this is her book on sex magic, and I think will just be like a nice intro. This is less about, you know, the sort of like active sex or whatever. I'm just very intrigued about how people use sex in magic, and also there's a lot of that that's tied to some own reclamation of stuff for myself. I'm not going to go into detail and everything about that here because it's none of your business, but I think that this is a subject that could be very empowering for me, and so using a witchy spin to it I think is also going to be helpful. Then we have 78 Degrees of Wisdom by Rachel Pollack. This is like the premier tarot learning book. Like everyone talks about this book as like the best book for learning tarot. I've been meaning to read it for a while. One of my goals for this year is to fully like really get into the tarot and like really learn all of the cards and things like that, and I think this will be a nice way to do that. And finally we have Honoring Your Ancestors, a guide to ancestral veneration. This is that working with your ancestors stuff. This ties into some of the Celtic stuff that I will do because a lot of my ancestors were Celtic. I also have some German history and things. I've just been interested in sort of like ancestor veneration, ancestor work for a while, and like unpacking a lot of that, and you know, all the things that tie into ancestor work. So this is talked about as being one of the best books about ancestor work, so wanting to dip my toes into that as well this year. So yeah, those are all the books that are at the top of my TBR. Hopefully these are the ones that I will read this year. These will probably be like the only ones I read this year if I read all of them, because I can probably average about a witchcraft book a month. We will see, but that is my plan. That is top of mind. Comment below, let me know if you have any opinions about these books, if there's anything I should know, or some of these books are not like good. I've heard mostly good things about them, but you never know. Or if you have other books on these topics that you have read and recommend, definitely let me know down below, or any books that you are interested in reading yourself. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all guys soon. Bye.